Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, I have a Bjorn's Mighty Thoughts video. This is kind of a podcast type video if this is the first time you've ever been here, and I'm just kind of rambling about a certain subject. And today's subject, I'm actually going to be talking about something I've seen recently in Ukraine, and what it has to do with, it actually has to do with a body armor improvisation I've recently seen. But I'm also going to take a time and talk about some other improvisations I've seen from Ukraine, as well as some other improvisations I've seen throughout history, mostly just to set a benchmark of different types of successful, non-successful, or moderately successful improvisations made throughout history. But first, I got a bit of a video clip here I'm going to play for you. I'm going to pause it at times, make some comments, and etc. So just bear with me, and hopefully you all enjoy this video.
Mykola and Alexander are welders. In the last few days, they have been forced to learn a completely new line of work, making metal plates for body armor.
Now, during wartime, learning a new line of work or trade or whatever, that's a pretty standard thing, I would say, right? I mean, you had women who'd never worked factories at all during World War II, and suddenly women are working in factories. Obviously, body armorers, mechanics, weaponsmiths, etc. might get somehow put into either armoring or weapons, whatever.
They weld them every day, while their main occupation has been shifted to another plant for now.
We are doing it to support our soldiers. In order to protect them, to support them, we decided to help. We help by cutting, assembling, welding. We spent about half a day, if not more.
The plates are made from car spring.
Now, spring steel is a really good material for what they're doing. Spring steel itself does have a bit of a spring to it. That's why it's called spring steel. It's kind of got some flexibility, but it will also spring back to its original shape, or at least for the most part. It's pretty hard to deform spring steel. There's actually some guys I know in the SCA that would use spring steel to make knives, as well as I know some guys that made armor plates. What they would do is they would heat the steel up, and they would use a hammer system to essentially thin the steel out and, of course, spread it. Because actually, spring steel, car spring type steel, is actually quite thick. I believe it's 1/4 inch. And that's based on what springs you're using, because some springs are a bit heavier, not much. Understand that I think 1/4 inch, if I recall correctly, from when I did work as a mechanic, was pretty much like the amount of steel to use, the thickness. Any thicker than that, it becomes too stiff. Any thinner than that, they're easy to snap.
Volunteers bring them to the production facility.
The way we do it is so-called shell method. The iron does not overheat. It's strong and it's good. We are welding so that the metal...
Now, see, what you're seeing here is they're actually layering the bars of steel together, and the reason they're doing it that way is because what it does is it allows them to quickly tack the steel together. The quicker they can tack the steel together, the better, because less likely it will lose its temper. The other thing, too, is if they would butt the steel plates together and then weld it, say they just use tacks, then you'd have a split in the steel where the two plates join together. Or you could obviously weld a bead straight across the steel. The problem with that is it produces more heat. It's longer time that the steel is being heated, and basically it could turn up making the steel brittle. So that in itself is a problem. And this is honestly, to keep the temper of the steel, this is literally the best method to go with. That being said, though, the thickness of the steel is kind of, well, you'll find out here. It's actually quite heavy.
is not burned out. We use tack welds here and on the backside. Then it's cut off under the shoulders, so it's good.
The weight of the body armor is up to 10 kilograms. It takes
10 kilograms, understand, for my American audience, is actually quite heavy for body armor. It's roughly 22 pounds. Yeah, at 22 pounds, it's actually a bit over double your standard mil-spec body armor. Understand, your standard mil-spec body armor ranges in at roughly 10 pounds, if I recall correctly. So that is actually quite heavy. That's a lot of weight, especially on your chest. Understand that the better something like this is going to cause problems with fatigue, the better your weight distribution, the better your weight's distributed. You kind of want to try and keep your weight even, because essentially it's more torture on your shoulders, your back, basically your upper body, and even your legs a little bit. So that's going to raise some difficulties in itself, especially when you're going to put one of these plates on that weighs almost 22 pounds. And then you're also going to put on a tactical rig, which then you're also going to have magazines, grenades, whatever other equipment you have on your front. You're going to end up needing a pretty heavy pack on your back to distribute that weight. So that does raise some problems in itself.
Takes about 10 minutes to make it.
Тобто ці пластини виробляємо.
Such plates are made from improvised materials because you know that in Ukraine now there is a problem with materials. What can we do for the army in these difficult times?
Yeah, they're using an improvised material, but literally these guys were brilliant in it. Once again, like I said, sprain steel for what they're doing. Great selection of steel for what they're doing. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind about the quality of sprain steel. I guess there's really all to be said about that.
I believe that each of us should do something for our country to make the occupant get out from our land as soon as possible.
All products are tested here. They are checked for durability with real ammunition.
Now, the one thing I wonder is what round are they using to check it? And I'm guessing it's probably the mil-spec, whatever they use in the field, the mil-spec ammunition. Now, that does to me look like an AK-74, which marks it as, well, they just fired a 5.45 by 39 round at it. I'm actually curious to how this steel would hold up to a 7.62 by 54R, which is the heavier. It's the Dragunov round. It's the medium machine gun round. I'm actually kind of curious to how it would hold up to that. Or even 7.62 by 39, which is the AKM round and SKS. As you can see there, it actually did hold up pretty good. I don't actually see a dent in the steel. I do see a little bit of discoloration, which that's an obvious. And even when they flipped it over, there's no bulge in the steel. So, I mean, it does exceptionally well. I mean, it, like I said, spring steel works good for something like this. You know, realistically, the only problem is it is just because of what they're doing and how they're doing it. It is so god-awfully heavy.
Both the military and the manufacturer are satisfied with the results. They continue to work. This company has already produced 800 pieces of body armor. After the protection has been distributed to the soldiers of the territorial defense of the Poltava region, they immediately started producing a new branch of body armor for Ukrainian soldiers. Reported by Anastasia Lisova, Pavlo Shtelmach, UAT.
So I do have to say that is actually a really interesting improvision that they've come up with. They've had, obviously they have multiple shortage issues trying to get supplies and etc., as well as they're relying on NATO itself to help provide some supplies. But then they've also come up with some improvisions of, you know, it comes down to, hey, we got a bunch of cars that we can't do anything with. They're just there. They're broke down or they're shot up or whatever. And we don't have enough body armor. We have perfectly good steel right there that we can use to make some form of body armor for troops. So that's an interesting improvisation. As well as there's some other interesting improvisations I have found out about recently. One of them here is on the disc machine gun. Now this, understand, this is either like a tripod mounted or usually mounted on a vehicle. More often than not, I see these mounted on vehicles over tripods or anything like that. But what they've done is they were taking the Dishka machine guns from tanks that were destroyed, captured, whatever, and they are adding a stock and a pistol grip to them. Now, the grip looks a bit uncomfortable, and it's actually a two-finger trigger, which is kind of a nuisance in itself. And then they got this huge muzzle brake and like this bipod that they've designed to do this with. And now they're only getting about 3 to 5 shots off, and they kind of have to reset the machine gun. So it's not exceptionally well, but it does work. And from what I understand, they've actually been doing this stuff, like these machine guns, since like 2014, when Russia initially invaded Ukraine. There's also what the improvisations they've been making with the PKT machine gun. Understand, the PKT is the PKM or the PKP. I believe it's actually the PKM, but it's a tanker model. So it's made to be put into a coaxial mounted system. It's got no stock. It has no pistol grip. It's got no bipod, anything like that. It's just mounted into a brace system, and then the firing control system is actually inside the tank itself. But they've come up with improvisations to add bipods to these PKT machine guns, as well as stocks, pistol grips, and triggers. And essentially, they're taking these machine guns, once again, taking machine guns from either captured or destroyed vehicles, and finding other ways to use them, especially in the realm of an infantry method. There's been other stuff throughout history of trying to do this. Some of them have been purpose-built. One of those was I believe it was the DT machine gun, was built in a way that it could actually be used in a tank or on foot as an infantryman. Now, I'm going to go over some other stuff throughout history that man has improvised together during warfare. But really quickly, I do want to plug my Spot Fund page. I got a Spot Fund page set up because I want to assist with things in Ukraine. I am planning on going over there to fight and actually joining the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and try to help out with the war efforts. But link in the video description for my Spot Fund page. Go ahead, check it out. Read the story, get any information, and feel free to ask questions, things of that nature. And, hopefully you can help me out. Even sharing it is helpful, folks. But so the next thing. Now, this is actually one I really know about very well because my grandfather did this. This is the Sherman Hedgehog, the Sherman Rhino. I believe it's actually Sherman Rhino is the name of it. It was an expedient modification that was made to the Sherman tanks after the D-Day landing. There wasn't enough Sherman dozer tanks to go around. And what they were doing is they were cutting up steel. They were actually cutting up the tank traps from the beach that was there during the D-Day landing. And they were welding them fast to the Sherman tanks. And what that was allowing the Sherman tanks to do was plow through the hedgerows in France. Now, this was a field expedient that worked actually exceptionally well. It helped America break through the hedgerows in France. But that being said, it didn't really stick around, mostly because it was a one-trick pony, and basically that was to clear hedgerows. Outside of that, it didn't really have any uses, but my grandfather was one of the many mechanics that was used to make this happen. Something like, if I recall correctly, he spent like 3 days cutting up and welding steel to Sherman tanks without stopping, as well as some of the other mechanics did as well. And with something like this was a really cheap, really easy to manufacture solution for a problem. Like I said, they were having problems getting through the hedgerows in France. One problem they were having is because of the limited amount of Sherman dozer tanks, the Sherman dozer was the only thing that could really punch through the hedgerow. The other tanks would get stuck or whatever. And the problem with that is once the Germans caught on to it, which they caught on very quickly, the Sherman dozer would start to punch through the hedgerow, And as it would start to punch through the hedgerow, the Germans would focus their anti-tank weapons on that Sherman and destroy that Sherman. And they knew they would stop a whole armored convoy behind it of Sherman tanks. So this was the best solution they could come up with. Cheap, effective. The steel was right there on the beach. The tools were already there because they were sent over anyway, as the mechanics, the motor pool needed those tools, such as torches, cutters, etc. And then the manpower cost was negligible. They were paying those soldiers no matter if they were standing around or if they were welding these hedgerows up or these hedgehogs up, because, well, soldiers get paid by the month, a salary, if you will. Now, the next one I want to talk about, and I want to say this one is definitely a very mixed result. And originally it was a field expedient, and it would be a field expedient that would actually go into production. It would be refined and put into production. This is a sticky bomb. Basically, you take composition B, some type of plastic explosive, you wrap it with glue, and you give it a fuse, and basically use it like a grenade. The problem is the throwing range of these things actually was not near as good as a grenade, as well as I did see some indication that sometimes the soldiers would go to use these, they would go to throw the sticky bomb and they'd end up sticking it to themselves. And basically it's got a grenade type fuse, so you don't really have long. You got to get rid of this hot potato as soon as you pull that pin. The other issue with that is it wasn't really effective against thicker armor. That being said, it was still effective at knocking the tracks off of tanks. Sometimes you could do damage to the engine as well as maybe the gun barrel or the optics. So while these was not a good solution for destroying a tank, they were a good solution for more or less just being a royal pain in the ass to the tank. By the way, this one hails from the British. And the next one I want to call an absolute failure, and that is, well, I guess everybody probably saw this coming. This is the Bob Semple tank. And essentially what it had to do with is there was a demand for tanks. I believe this is Norway. There was a demand for tanks, and they needed to find a quick, cheap, effective solution, and they needed something that could be put together indigenously. And this was the best thing they could come up with. Basically, it's a farming tractor with a bunch of plates covering the farming tractor and a turret put on top. Not a very good turret, by the way. The armor was not very thick. The vehicle was very tall, but also very narrow, which gave it a very poor center of gravity. It was just one of those things that, in general, this was a bad idea. And in all honesty, this would have got people killed. Now, there wasn't ever many of them produced. I think there was actually only a total of 3, if I recall correctly. And none of them actually got an anti-tank gun, even though it was planned to have an anti-tank gun. Originally, it was planned to have the British 2-pounder, which is a 40-millimeter anti-tank gun. And then later, it was changed to an American 37-millimeter anti-tank gun. It never happened. They ended up using nothing but machine guns on it, and it's got something like 7 machine guns. So it is a machine gun death blossom, but one problem is they didn't use a belt-fed machine gun. They used the Bren gun, which is a magazine-fed machine gun. It's only got 30-round magazines. And from what I understand, based on what position you were in, the machine gun was actually really hard to load, especially particularly there on the machine gun on the rear. And you couldn't really aim the machine guns. The machine guns were meant to be aimed, but the way the Bob Semple tank was created, you were looking at a viewport off to the side or above the machine gun and actually not using the machine gun's actual gun sights. So realistically, all in all, this was just a really, really bad idea. And it was, I would consider it as a field expedient, as we have a problem. this guy came up with a solution that we could quickly do in the field, and that was the idea. They could take the tractor that they were using and they could muster this up and literally put it together in a farmer's field as long as they had the tools and the steel. But still, it was horrible. The armor plating wouldn't have protected it from any anti-tank weapons whatsoever. Even anti-tank rifles. Actually, anti-tank rifles would have worked against this. And basically the idea was this vehicle was designed around the need of possibly defending the country from an invasion from Japan. So Japan did have anti-tank rifles. They had 20 millimeter anti-tank rifles, and they would have penetrated through this thing no problem, as well as artillery, any type of artillery. A mortar probably would have destroyed this, and even a hand grenade would have done heavy damage if blown up very close by to the vehicle. So not a very good example of a good field, or this is a very good example of a bad field expedient. But anyway, folks, that's going to wrap up the video. It went a little bit longer than I thought it would, but I thought I would talk in depth about some of the stuff and show some examples throughout history. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.